coming in on
Oh, yeah.
his mic right now.
His mic. Okay. If you could just say your name, please.
Bill Dukes.
The regiment and everything that's right.
Okay. Okay. What branch of service did you serve in?
I served in the United States Army. The division. Do you want the division and the whole works here? I suppose. Okay, it was the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment, which is part of the 11th Airborne. That was the group it was in.
Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I guess you could say I was a draftee because I volunteered for induction, as they called it. When I found out they were going to be drafting 19-year-olds, why then I decided to go in, or my parents decided they'd let me go at that time. And so then I went up to Fort Snelling and volunteered to be drafted into the United States Army.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living in Aberdeen, South Dakota, where I went to high school, and we lived there since 1938, I think we lived there.
Why did you pick the service that you joined?
Well, I think I was influenced a little by the people I knew. I wanted, of course, right away when the war started to go in, and some of the other young fellows were going in. And I was only 18, and of course then the age of consent was 21. So if I wanted to be in the up and up, why, I went down to the recruiting office of the Marines and the Navy, and my dad wouldn't sign it. And we never got along very well for about a year. But then, as I said, in the fall of 42, they decided they were going to draft 19-year-olds, and that's when I decided to go down. But there was a junior high football coach who came back after he'd been in a while. He was all decked out in a parachute regiment's outfit, jump boots, and the jumpsuit and everything else. And of course, that kind of influenced me a little bit. I think I wanted to do something a little more elite, than just going in. So that's how I happened to come to join in that outfit.
Can you recall any of your first days of service at all?
Pardon?
Can you recall any of the first days of service at all?
Oh yeah, I was quite taken with the whole affair. I went to Fort Snelling in Minnesota, and of course they treated the inductees pretty well. We had very good food, very good chow. So if we didn't have much else to do, they were processing people going in, and they had more people down there than they could handle at that time. There were plenty of draftees, and so we pulled KP for a couple of weeks, and I was quite impressed with the whole thing. And then they told me where I was going, and I was even more impressed. They said I was going down to Camp Toccoa, Georgia, and that sounded good to me because when I went down to Snelling, it was about 22 below in Minnesota at that time. And I thought, if I go to Georgia, I'm going to put on the suntans and it's going to be nice. And I was wrong. Like the froze to death down in northern Georgia.
So you got to travel quite a bit then. Like before that, were you away from home at all? Or?
No, not much. I think I never did go too far away from home. That was the first time I was really out. I didn't really get homesick. They didn't give you time to get homesick, and it wore you out and got you tired, and then you wouldn't think too much about where you're going. But I wasn't much impressed with the first day I got down there. It was cold and rainy in that red mud. We got shots, and then they hauled us out for PE right in the middle of that stuff. And so I got my comeuppance pretty early.
Wasn't quite the greatest experience, I suppose, either. Okay. What are some other like camp or boot training experiences?
Well, that was Camp Toccoa, Georgia. And we were only there about a month, and then I went shipped out to Camp Toccoa, North Carolina, which is down in that Gulf country down there by Pinehurst and Southern Pines in that area. That's a lot different. Sand hills down there. And that's where I had the basic training was down at Camp Toccoa, North Carolina. And you want me to just go on with where we're going? I mean, where I went? Well, then I went after about 3 months of basic. Then I went to jump school down at Fort Benning, Georgia, parachute training jump school. And that's about a 6-week affair. And they put you through, well, there are different phases. The physical hardening is the first one, which wasn't that hard because we've been doing it anyway every day. But we went through that, and then a little hand-to-hand combat stuff, and then finally the training off the towers and back in the chutes and learn what to do. And then the final week was 5 jumps. You pack your own chutes and jump 5 times. Then you're a qualified parachutist, I guess.
How long did your training to become a parachuter last?
Just that, to get the parachute training and to get the wings and that sort of thing, about 6 weeks. We're down there about 6 weeks. Then I went back to McCall, and then we began, tactical training and simulated combat stuff and that sort of thing. But I was there till about November, and then of 43, and then they shipped us down to Camp Polk, Louisiana. Went through maneuvers down there in the wintertime, which is a lot of fun.
What are maneuvers? I don't know.
Well, they simulate the kind of problems and the kind of conditions you're going to have in combat. In fact, they try to make it as real as possible. And you're competing usually against other Army units as best you can, and they determine by that whether you're ready, combat ready. And from there, of course, you're going to go overseas someplace. And I was there, I think, from November and early December probably in Polk until the next spring. We left the country. But I went from there to Camp Stoneman, California, which is just outside of Frisco. And from there, we were shipped overseas and went to New Guinea, the southern part of New Guinea, Papua Bay, Oro Bay, I guess Papua is at that time. And the campaign for southern New Guinea was already over when we got over there. So it was just an extension of our training and so on. But we had a very eventful trip over. A Liberty ship is one of those ones that they put together in a hurry, during the war. And it's about 8,000 miles over there, Frisco to Guinea. It took us 26 days because we had no escort. So they would zigzag like that, and everybody was glad to get off the ship, say that. And then we started our training there again, and we were there in New Guinea till about late October, and then we headed for the combat area. We were shipped out to Leyte in the Philippines. That's where we had our first baptism of fire in Leyte.
Excuse me, Bill.
Yep.
I just gotta stop you for a second.
Okay, we're going to keep going. So, with your training and all that experience, you got to travel all over the place. Like, how long was you traveled in the United States and went overseas too, still doing training then?
We trained for quite a while. We were well trained, unlike some troops that unfortunately weren't very well trained and had to go to combat that quickly. So I think we were about as well trained as it could be. I was well over a year that we were in training. And the 11th Airborne was the only airborne division to go over to in the Pacific. There were, I think 5 airborne divisions. 4 of them went to Europe, actually. We went the other way. And I suspect that the reason that you were only one is that the Pacific is not really the best place to use airborne troops. As far as they knew then, airborne, until World War II, airborne was not something that they ever thought would work. But, you know, we started at about 1940, I think, and then the Germans had so much success with it in Holland, and then they went to Crete, and then they took Crete. They took it easily. They took terrific casualties. But we didn't know that. I mean, American planners didn't know that. So it was pretty much a gamble. And the thing is, the Pacific, you don't have large land masses. You got a lot of islands, a lot of jungle, a lot of water, and so it's going to be a different ball game. And so we were the only ones over there, the 11th Airborne. There were, I think, the Marines started and did have a parachute battalion, but eventually they were absorbed into their, through necessity, into their regular brigades and divisions. And there were one or two independent regiments, like 503, I think, became a combat team, and they were over in the Pacific too. But the 11th Airborne was the only real Army parachute division over there.
So it was just kind of experimental first starting out with airplanes?
Yeah, our first action in Leyte was as regular infantry. We didn't jump in there. In fact, the initial landings were made in October, and we didn't come in until November. And but they stopped at the coast. They just got the foothold, and they drove the Japs back into the mountains. And then when we got there, they decided on a plan to go around the island with certain troops and move forward here, and then send the division, our division, through the middle, up through the gut of the. Really wasn't the gut of Leyte; it was all mountains, but it was a nightmare. And it was our first combat, and but the physical conditions were so terrible. It was a rainy season, and you're slipping and sliding in mud and mountains and trackless areas, and there's no, the trails were all narrow, so it was difficult to mass men on a front. You had to almost go in columns in order to get there. But we were in there about a little over 30 days. It was no fun.
Terrible conditions.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really good.
So that was your first combat experience?
Yeah.
With your unit or whatever, you were with, like, did you have a lot of friends with that? Like, that you knew from your training experiences too? Or?
You mean in our division?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you get pretty close. You're living with people every day like that, and boy, and you're in the field and you're out in the combat area, you're really living with them. I mean, there's nothing that there's nothing sacred, and you get used to the guy next. You better get used to him. And he depends on you, and you depend on him. Yeah, you lose a few and it hurts, but it was a real eye opener for me anyway, like that. And we didn't. A lot of our food and stuff never got to us. We didn't carry. We carry so much rations. They drop them in, but in the clouds, half the time you couldn't get the planes to come home and drop them in the right spot. They dropped a lot of them in territory where the Japs were. They ate a lot of our rations, and everybody was hungry. Of course, I think that's a soldier's lot, an infantryman anyway. He's always hungry, and never gets enough sleep. But we got through it finally, and it was about 30 days. It was right before Christmas, I think, when we got through to Ormoc on the opposite side of the island of Leyte. Then we went from there by LCI, landing ships, landing craft infantry, I guess they call it. We went around the island back to where we came from, and then from there we had a few days off, and then we went to Mindoro, which was an island just south of Luzon. And there, of course, we made preparations to get into the fair on Luzon. Luzon, the first people in Luzon came in north part of it called Lingayen Gulf, and I think the 38th Division was the first one that came in there. They came in January, and then they started moving south, and we came in from the south. 11th Airborne Division landed two regiments at Sugbu on the west coast, and then the 511th I was in. We jumped on Tagatai Ridge. It was our combat jump. The first one and the only one that I made was a combat jump. And this Tagatai Ridge was north of Lake Taal and pretty rough ground. We didn't have too much trouble when we didn't run into much until we got on the ground and started moving out. And we got over to, I can't think of the name of the highway now, but anyway, the little town of Emus is where we ran into our first resistance. And from then on, it was all resistance, from there on into Manila over the next few days. And the presidential citation that was showed there, that was given to our unit, 2nd Battalion of the 511th, going into Manila, past the Paranaque River, and you run into the houses and pillboxes, and it was tough going. There was a lot of casualties in through there.
Remember any personal experiences from that? Anything that stuck out at you?
Well, yeah, I remember tried to save a guy's life by putting my hand in his wound, and it didn't work anyway. He was already beyond it. Couldn't do anything, and it affects you. And but I tell you, a lot of that stuff you kind of block out. Comes back once in a while when you run into that stuff. But we got through, got into the southern part of Manila, the Genko line, and we were able to break that, or to help break it. There were other troops involved. Got up to the airstrips, Nichols that area, and then out to Fort McKinley. And then that was pretty much secured after that. When the Battle of Manila was over. And then we went into rest camp for a couple of weeks down in the southern part of Luzon and Batangas. And after that it was mopping up in the southern part of Luzon and Manila. And mostly that was mountain strongholds that were trying to reduce at the end, and a lot of the Jap wouldn't give up, and they hung right in there, and you have to go in there and dig them out. And that was a lot tougher than it sounds, this mopping up business. You know, when you were moving forward on attack, you expect, to run into difficulties. But in the mopping up, you're never quite sure there. I know one Mount Bajang that we eventually took in it. I think it took 3 cracks at it, 3 different units, before I eventually got it handled. And we took quite a few casualties there. And supposedly, the battle for Luzon was practically over. As soon as they get real control of it, why, they say it's over. But unfortunately, the Japs didn't feel that way. They had a different view of things. They didn't appreciate prisoners of war. They didn't want to take prisoners of war. They felt they were cowards, and that's the way they operated too. I know when we came out of Leyte, in the last week of that Leyte, we never took prisoners, and I know they never did either. But there's no place to put them anyway. Where are you going to put them? an airborne outfit is a reduced outfit. In other words, they were short number. I think the regular division had probably had, maybe 15,000 men, between 12 and 15,000 men. An airborne division had about 8,000. And we were short on everything. I mean, we had just light artillery, and each battalion had a headquarters company that had machine guns and heavy mortars. But other than that, you're a short division. And that's, you run into all kinds of things. You don't have the equipment to do it.
Did you get into a lot of tight spots then? I mean, do you have any?
Yeah, I thought Leyte was about as tight as it gets when we were there. But it was hairy coming up into Manila. They were shooting. They had a couple of naval guns they took off of some of their ships. They were big ones, probably 12, 13, 14-inch guns, and 20 millimeter anti-aircraft guns shot down. Our regimental commander got blown away with a 20 millimeter slug, hit him in the chest. So that it was tough going, and I was just lucky, real lucky. I got nicked, and that's about all. I didn't get a crippling wound or anything like that. And I was only in the hospital for a few days, back to service duty again. Well, and after that was over, that was the summer now. I guess they declared the island secure, Luzon, in the middle of December, about July, I think it was. But then we knew what was coming up. You see, the Marines had taken, and the Army took Okinawa, and then they had taken Iwo Jima, February, and of course the next step's Japan. So we were all aware of what was coming up. The invasion of Japan was coming up, and they were already making plans for it. So we knew that. And in fact, they'd already told us that about November is when we'd be going into Japan. But then they dropped the bomb. And of course, none of the people I was around knew what it even was. What's an atomic bomb? And no idea, but they said it was a tremendously powerful affair. And we were all in favor of that. If you can end the war, why do it? Well, they dropped one on the 6th, and then they dropped another one on Nagasaki on the 9th. And then we began to back up. And they said, we're going to Okinawa. And we finally got there, but we had a little trouble. They tried to load troops, infantrymen, into B-24s, bombers, and didn't work. In fact, one of them crashed right ahead of me. They took off and made it up so high they came down and burnt, killed them all. And then they stopped the operation. What they said, and I assume that that's true, that the B-24 was built for a concentrated bomb load, in the bomb bay area. And then you take the same amount of weight and distribute it throughout the plane in a human being. It didn't work, but they found out pretty quickly, and they didn't do it again. So we had to wait another week or so for to get the big transports to take us to Okinawa. And we were there a short time. What I didn't know at that time, none of us knew, that they had sent a special plane from Japan to the Philippines, special marked planes that wouldn't be shot down. And they made the negotiations for the surrender. That was the 14th of August. We didn't know that. The 14th of August, we were on Okinawa. And then they made the decision and they came back, but the word didn't get out to the troops. We were told we're going into Japan, but we're going in peaceably. We had full field gear, but we went into Atsugi airstrip outside of Tokyo. And we were one of the first troops in there on August 30th. And then 2 days later, the Missouri steamed in the bay, and MacArthur had his surrender proceedings, and it was all over there. And our outfit stayed over there as occupation troops. I was there from till December, about the second week in December. I came home.
Claire Wellen, would you report to the auditorium, please? Claire Wellen, to the auditorium.
But that was fun coming home, and I was glad to come. By the way, I came home on a big ship, USS Intrepid, which is one of the most hit ships in the fleet, I guess. It's an aircraft carrier, big one. But we hit the tail end of a storm that hit the Philippines, a big typhoon. And it took us 2 extra days to get across the Pacific. I'll tell you, I was never so glad to get off a ship in my life when I got home there. And the gun tubs were dipping water, and when they'd get crosswise into those big swells, the big screws would come out of the water, and the ship would just shake, you know. But back there to where I left, Camp Stoneman, California. And then they shipped me to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And I got discharged there the day after Christmas, 1945.
Nice Christmas present, huh?
A heck of a Christmas present, yeah.
When you were parachuting, did you ever run into some situations? I mean, did you just love the air flying?
Oh, the jumping was great. You know, when we were in the States, a lot of guys would get all the jumps they could. You know, they'd sneak on into a bunch of other troopers that were jumping, and then they'd jump, and that wasn't bad. But the chutes that they have today, I can see, are so much superior than what we had. We had the old, first the silk chute, regular silk chute, that was, you know, the typical looking chute. I've seen pictures of it. And they were changed by the time that I was jumping, why they went to a nylon chute. And it was a different situation because the old silk chute, they'd say, you know, it took 4 seconds to open. And you'd count, you know, when you went out of the plane, 1,000, 1,002, 1,003, better be starting open, you know. Well, the nylon was much slower. Sometimes it'd go down to 5 sometimes before you figured. A lot of fellas opened the reserve chute too quick, and then had 2, and then you got to miss, and you got to collapse 1. But as far as the jumping part of it, I thought that was a lot of fun, you know, at the time. And the combat jump, it was uneventful for us. We didn't jump into a cauldron down there or anything. We didn't run into anything until a little bit later. But I thought that the jumping was the plan. Most people did. Most kids. We were all young. I was 19 years old when I went in. And a lot of things are fun at 19. But I thought that was great. You always worried every once in a while. We never had. I think we had one man in the training periods we had that was killed, and his chute didn't open. It's cigarette rolled, and he couldn't get it open. But normally, most people didn't have trouble with that. But you didn't have much control of your chute, I can tell you that. First of all, when you jumped at jump school, they jumped you 1,500 feet, and then they'd go down to 1,000 for the next few jumps. But that's a lot of time. But the longer you're in the air, the more vulnerable you are, as they found out in Europe. You know, and so what you want to do is jump as close to the ground as you can safely, so that when you come out and you oscillate a couple times and you're down, you know, something like that. But so they jumped us in tactical. We had our tactical training. We jumped a lot lower, 800 feet, 600 feet even once in a while. But particularly the plane, when you go out of the chute, or out of the ship rather, in order to have you clear the tail, they have to feather the prop and point the nose down. So then you come out, you'll slide under the tail and not hit it, you know, down like that. So the first guy out, he's jumping probably, let's say, at 800 feet. The last guy out's probably jumping at 700, because you're sliding down all that time. But I never worried much about that. It was when you got on the ground that things got tough.
About your medals, Can you talk about your medals that you received at all?
Yeah.
Explain a little bit. Hold these for.
You want me to hold them?
Yeah.
Should I open them up, or?
Yeah. Just explain to us what you received.
Yeah, this one, you see him? Okay. This, of course, is the Purple Heart. That's easy to see that. And I got that, I guess, as a result of wounds on March in the Maliponia Mountains, and we got chased off a hill, and I got hit by mortar shrapnel, what it was, like that. And this is that presidential unit citation that I mentioned we got for going into Manila those few days in there. These are the wings similar to the ones you got when you jumped. This is the combat infantryman's badge, and at the time I didn't even know what it was, at the time when I went in, but it's one of the I think the decorations that most infantrymen are proudest of, is if you were a combat infantryman. And, the infantry is the queen of battle, you call them, the mudsloggers, And the other is for, I guess, valor or whatever, the Bronze Star. And that's about all we got.
Do you have personal stories behind any of those? Anything you'd like to share?
No, I told you that it was Beijing was a real tough place. They set up a squad to reconnoiter, and they got chased off. And so then the next day they set up a couple of platoons up there, and they got chased off. And so then they finally sent a company up, and that's when I went up with the Company D. And we did get to the top, but we were overrun. There were too many of them, and we caught quite a few casualties that came down. And that's one time I really thought maybe we weren't going to make it. The way things looked, we had a number of people who were casualties, and we took a lot of wounds that day. And eventually they got another company, 2 other companies to go up there, and they finally did get them off that one. But that's about as close as it comes for me.
Well, a little bit about military life, I guess. I mean, your training, I guess you kind of enjoyed traveling around, jumping and doing parachuting and stuff, but when you were in combat overseas, did you have anything for entertainment at all?
Oh yeah, when we were in training.
Pan down for some reason. That's all right though.
It's a new effect.
All right, whatever.
This is in the States as well. And we had, baseball teams. They played baseball too. We even had football, touch football, no uniforms, so they had to play touch football. You couldn't play tackle. They had all that in your spare time and when you were in training. When you were in the States, they had a lot of that. But I think overseas, where we had some time, why the biggest draw was boxing. Boxing. Every unit had a boxing team. So it was a big deal over there.
Did you participate in boxing at all?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I got a little souvenir here for it.
That's good. All right. So let's see. I guess we'll kind of wrap this up here a little bit. When your service ended around Christmas time, I guess.
Yeah, I was at Fort Leavenworth on Christmas Day, and the next day they signed my sheets and I got out of there once and got my back pay and got out of there. You sit around and wait. You wanted to go home as fast as you could, but they can't handle everything. They say, this is December, the war had been over, since September. And so they still had problems of bringing men home on both sides of the pond, in Europe as well. And of course, the public wanted to bring their boys home and their husbands and sons and so on. So they had quite a problem to get them home. So a lot of times you just waited and wasted a lot of time waiting for them to process your papers and everything, so you get honorably discharged, And I think I was in maybe Camp Stone when I arrived from Japan, 3 or 4 days, and then it took another better part of a week to get to Leavenworth, Kansas. And I was only there a few days, and then I was home. I'd say that probably about the middle of the month when I got to the States, and by the 26th I was out. I was hoping I'd get home for Christmas, but didn't quite make it.
Okay. So you got home around 2 weeks or 3 weeks took, and then I don't know, after all this, like, I guess you were a teacher over at BHS, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What was your occupation, I guess, after the war? What did you go into?
Well, I went to school right away. I went to University of South Dakota in January '45, just a few days after I got home, down there and started their second semester. And I went there for 2 years, and I transferred to Morningside in Sioux City, and got married. That's the reason I transferred, I guess. But anyway, got married, and I finished up, undergraduated from Morningside in '49. Went to summer school, and then I taught school and I coached down in Mobridge, South Dakota, for 7 years, and I was a little dissatisfied. I wasn't making any money, that's for certain. So I went to work for Mobil Oil Company, and I worked for them for 3.5 years. And they sent me up here, eventually to Garrison, North Dakota. And I worked for them for 3.5 years, and then I decided to come back to teaching. Didn't work out. We weren't happy. I was gone all the time. My wife didn't like that business at all, so go back to work. I said, if you'll go to work, well, I'll go back to teaching. And that's what happened. And I came down here.
Was it hard fitting back into the regular civilian life after being gone?
Yeah, it was. When you're in the service, you're regimented so much. You tell you what to do, and it depended on the individual how well they took that sort of stuff. And I didn't mind it so much, but it was a complete change, and you heard that word so many times, you got to find yourself, but I guess that probably was it, to find out what you wanted to do and so on. And I think most fellas felt they missed something, while the war was going on. They missed all what a lot of people were doing back here. But I think, well, I got out of the service in 45, end of 45, and I got married in 47, and that changed my life quite a bit. And I think that probably straightened things out as far as I was concerned better than anything else. Gave me a little direction. Before that, I was still having fun. You know, I played some football and played some baseball and did a lot of hunting. But after I got married, then it became a little more normal, I think. And but it was an adjustment, and I think what really the people who noticed it and so on were the people close to you. So I wasn't married and went overseas with my folks, but they were, you know, they were worried. I got home, you're not the same person. Well, I wasn't the same person. For anything, if anything, I was 3 years older. That makes quite a difference in that period. But your values, war, you get kind of calloused. You have to. You have to be able to handle what comes and take it in stride, or you go nuts. Yeah.
Okay, and then did you attended any reunions of the war at all?
Yeah, we've had.
Old friends
I didn't go to a reunion for a long time. I didn't know they had them. But eventually, you know, they get around to calling you. Some of your friends will call you and so on. And it was 1985. That would be, what, at least 30 years before. And I hadn't even, I saw one guy that I knew in that period that had been in the service down in South Dakota. And that was about it. And then all of a sudden, I'd been to the reunion. Well, they'd already had a few reunions when I got told about it. And then I went to them. I started going in '86, and I've probably gone to maybe 7 or 8. Haven't been able to make it every time. And it was, the division wasn't much, too big division. And then all they did is politic. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go back, see the guys I knew, and talk over old times and that sort of thing. But then when we got down to getting together on a company basis, everybody in the same company, these are the people you knew, these are the people you fought with, these are the people you lived with, and that's the ones that were important. And I still go to them. I missed the last couple because of health, but no, as long as they're going to have them, I'll be going to them if I can.
I suppose you reminisce with your old friends.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose we're wrapping this up, but is there anything you wanted to tell us about? I don't know, any experiences?
No, I don't think so. I wasn't all that exciting. I mean, I didn't live that, or have that much to say, you know. You have a mixed feeling. You know, they talk about the war now, and I think that too many people don't realize what war is. It's when I first went out as a kid, and I wanted to be a hero. I thought there'd be a lot of glory. Well, I learned differently. There's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of dying going on in war. Somebody's doing it, if not everybody. And it's a serious thing. We've got a real problem in our hands now. You know, I think people's attitudes are a little bit different, but there's a lot of mixed emotions and people who think we should go over there, and a lot of people think we shouldn't. And the saying is that wow.
She's a level 6 and I forgot to get it. Last test of the deep. Steady as she goes. That sucked, Andy. You totally moved that one. Move
I
it.
didn't try to. There's nothing that I won't try. Butterflies and ice, nasty looks, chill. I'm gonna capture the sun for the hell of it. Nah.
We can just do a still clip.
spring and summer of 1940.
Exactly so.
No.
No, it was just kind of funny though.
These situations Bill faced have
I think it'll be almost like
Together twice over.
but not all.
Other than like,
Thank you.
and then this part was tricky because we
That was a lot tougher than it sounds, just mopping
kind
up
of
business.
jumps a little bit.
And when you were moving forward on an attack, you expect.
Comrades and officers.
colored by detail.
Well,
Got it. But here.
Let the light get in there.
forgotten. With hero...
I tell you, a lot of that stuff you kind of block out, comes back.
should not be forgotten. With heroism comes tragedy, and Bill faces